shiny.
Yes! Shiny Pokemon are some of the most exciting and coveted Pokemon to catch in Pokemon Go. But what are the chances of actually finding one? Today, I'm gonna go over everything you need to know about shiny rates in Pokemon Go. With the recent widespread disappointment over the shiny rates during Pokemon Go Fest, I figured now is a great time to go over how shiny rates actually work in Pokemon Go. So for this, I'm using a couple different sources. There are two very good resources that have collected a lot of data on shiny rates for Pokemon Go, starting with the Sylph Road. The Sylph Road has a page on their website, which is linked below, that compiles shiny rates for every Pokemon in Pokemon Go, and all the data is sourced from the Sylph research team, so you know it's pretty reliable. The other website that I'm referencing is a Japanese website that also surveys players and has pretty similar results to the Sylph Road, so it seems like they line up. But the fact that it lines up pretty well with the Sylph Road makes it seem like it's probably pretty trustworthy as well. So let's start with the highest shiny rate in Pokemon Go, and that is for legendary Pokemon. The chance of getting a shiny legendary once the shiny is actually released is about 1 in 20, or a 5% chance. That applies to all legendaries that have their shiny released in raids. It applies to legendaries when you encounter them through GBL, when they used to be in research breakthroughs, who knows if that's ever coming back. All of those encounters have a 5% chance of being shiny. That obviously includes the current legendary raid boss Groudon, it includes the upcoming legendary Mewtwo, and every other legendary that's ever had its shiny released in Pokemon Go. Now there is actually one even higher shiny rate, and that's only used during legendary raid days. On legendary raid days, like when we had Articuno, Zapdos, Moltres raid days 4 years ago, during those raid days, the legendary shiny rate is boosted to 1 in 10, or a 10% chance of getting a shiny. But after that event ends, the shiny rate goes back to the standard 1 in 20 legendary rate. The next most common shiny rate after that is the Community Day shiny rate. During Community Day, the featured Pokemon has a 1 in 25 shiny rate, or about 4% chance of being shiny. Now this shiny rate only applies to the featured Pokemon during Community Day hours, but it would obviously include every Community Day Pokemon that we've had, like Charmander, Porygon, Charmander again. They've all had a 1 in 25 shiny rate, and that would explain why sometimes you walk away from Community Day with like 35 shinies. The next shiny rate is what we call the Permaboost shiny rate, and it's approximately 1 out of 64, or a 1.5% chance of being shiny. And this shiny rate is typically used for Pokemon that are a little bit more rare, or that are exclusively in raids or eggs. It includes the egg exclusive baby Pokemon like Azurill, Tyrogue, Mime Jr., Riolu. It includes Pokemon that have pretty much only been available through raids like Rockruff, Druddigon, Timber. The Permaboost shiny rate is also used for shadow Pokemon that you can get from Team Go Rocket leaders. So those shadow Pokemon that you get from Arlo, Cliff, and Sierra also have a 1.5% chance of being shiny. And it's also used for some wild Pokemon that are typically more rare. Pokemon like Onix, Sneasel, Skarmory, Scyther. So if there's a shiny Pokemon that you seem to get a lot of, even though you feel like you don't catch that many of them, for me it's Scyther, there's a good chance it has this Permaboost shiny rate. The next shiny rate is kind of a rare one. It's not used for very many Pokemon, but Sylph Road calls it the medium shiny rate. It's about 1 out of 125, and currently the only Pokemon that it applies to are Gible, Shinx, and Meltan. And that's important with shiny Meltan coming back during the TCG crossover event, so if you're trying to get the shiny Meltan during the event, just make sure you know it's about a 1 in 125 chance of being shiny. And finally, we have the base shiny rate, and this is the shiny rate that's used for just about every other Pokemon in Pokemon Go. So any Pokemon that's released as a new shiny during an event, and any Pokemon that's just available out in the wild as you're playing the game normally, has the base shiny rate of approximately 1 out of 500, or a 0.2% chance of being shiny. This is the standard shiny rate, and it applies to just about everything that doesn't fall into one of the categories that we talked about previously. Obviously, this is way too many Pokemon to just list out, but just to give you some examples, this shiny rate applies to Pokemon like Nidoran, Oddish, Diglett, regional Pokemon like Kangaskhan, Tauros, Lunatone. Even some rarer Pokemon that you'd really hope had a higher shiny rate like Miltank, Darumaka, and Delibird fall into this category. So now that you know all of the common shiny rates in Pokemon Go and when they're usually used, there are a couple more things that you need to know about shinies. Number one is that shiny rate is set per Pokemon, meaning no matter how you encounter that Pokemon, whether you hatch it from an egg, catch it from a raid, find it in the wild, the shiny rate is going to be the same. So doing a raid for a specific Pokemon isn't going to give you better odds than just finding it out in the wild, which is the reason that I typically don't try to raid to get new shinies, especially ones that don't have a boosted rate. And even the ones with a boosted rate, like Rockruff, I really don't spend a lot of extra money trying to get the shiny because it just doesn't feel like it's worth it to me. Another important thing to know is that Pokemon can change shiny rates, but it's typically only for events. Obviously, Pokemon that are featured during Community Day get a boosted shiny rate, they move up to 1 in 25, but after that event is over, they'll typically go back to the base shiny rate. So any Pokemon that has had a Community Day probably is back in the base rate at this point. During other events like Research Day, Pokemon will have their shiny rate boosted, so Clamperl Research Day, Lotad Research Day, probably the upcoming Cranidos and Shieldon Research Day, those Pokemon will move up to a higher shiny rate because it would be kind of impossible to get the shiny from Research if they were at the base rate. Now the thing with Niantic is that they sometimes forget to change the shiny rate or forget to turn a shiny on completely. During Execute Research Day in Australia and New Zealand, the shiny rate wasn't boosted at all, and of course the players there kind of just assumed, well, maybe it's not supposed to be boosted. But then it was boosted for later time zones, and that's why Australia and New Zealand in those early time zones got a makeup Execute Research Day, because Niantic forgot to boost the shiny. And unfortunately, that is something that happens pretty often, especially in those first time zones. And the last thing I want to go over is your actual chances of finding a shiny. And for this, I'm kind of focusing on paid shinies that you have to raid for or hatch eggs for. I'm not going to do an in-depth statistics lesson, but basically we should all know that 1 in 64 doesn't mean you're guaranteed to get a shiny after 64 encounters. In fact, it can take much longer, as I'm sure some of you are aware. As an example, for shiny Rayquaza, it's a 1 in 20 shiny rate, but it took me 60 raids to get the shiny, and then another 60 raids to get a second shiny. And with probability, you're never guaranteed a shiny. So if you are the world's unluckiest person, you could theoretically do 1,000 legendary raids and never get a shiny. It's not likely, but it is possible. So to just cover the common shiny rates, especially the paid shiny rates, if you're doing legendary raids and you do 20 raids, there is a 65% chance that you get the shiny. It's not 100% because you did 20, it's actually only a 65% chance after 20 raids. In fact, it would take 59 raids to reach a 95% chance of getting the shiny. That's a pretty good chance. Chances are you're probably going to have it by 59, but there's still a 5% chance that you don't have it by then. Moving on to the Permaboost rate, the one that's typically used for egg or raid exclusive shinies. Remember, it's 1 in 64 chance of getting a shiny, but after 64 encounters, you actually only have a 61% chance of finding it. After 100 encounters, that means 100 raid passes used or 100 eggs hatched, you have a 77% chance of getting the shiny. And you would need to do 200 encounters, aka spend $200 on raid passes, in order to have a 95% chance of getting a shiny at the Permaboost 1 in 64 shiny rate. And the reason I'm telling you all this is because I know far too many people who have spent far too much money trying to get a shiny. And for what? Is that little blue dog really worth $200 to you? And then finally, for the base rate, and this will explain why I never spend extra money trying to raid for base rate shinies. After 500 encounters, you have a 63% chance of getting the shiny. In order to reach a 95% chance of getting a base rate shiny, you need to have 1,500 encounters, which is honestly probably impossible if you're just raiding. So when it comes to base rate shinies, I'm either finding it in the wild randomly or getting super lucky with my free raid pass for the day, but I'm never spending extra money trying to get these base rate shinies. So there you go, that's everything you need to know about shiny rates and how they work in Pokemon Go, and hopefully that can help you make more informed decisions as to how you spend your money within this game, because I hate to see people end up disappointed after spending hundreds of dollars chasing after a slightly different colored Pokemon. Now, if you want to see some bad shiny luck in action, feel free to watch this video where I spend way too much money trying to get shiny Rayquaza. Don't be like me. See you in the next one. Bye.